January 1944. High above Western Europe, the air is thin and brittle, stretched tight by altitude and cold. At 25,000 feet, the sky has turned a darker blue, almost metallic. Engine noise is constant here. 2. Allison engines cutting through the air in uneven harmony, their vibrations traveling through aluminum, bone, and instinct. A Lockheed P-38. Lightning moves alone against the wind. Its twin booms leave pale contrails that linger longer than they should. Somewhere ahead, German radar stations have already marked its position. Somewhere below, flak crews wait without seeing it. And somewhere behind, Luftwaffe fighters are climbing disciplined, experienced, confident. The American pilot at the controls was not trained for heroics. He came from Georgia farmland, where machines were fixed by listening, not guessing. He knows the Lightning's reputation. Too large, too strange, too easy to spot. German pilots have learned how to kill it. What he knows what the enemy does not is that the P-38's engines are not merely for speed or altitude. Under the right hands, they can become something else entirely. As the distance between hunter and hunted collapses, survival will depend not on firepower, but on understanding how an aircraft truly breathes. By the time American fighters began appearing regularly over occupied Europe, the war in the air was already old, hardened by experience, and unforgiving to newcomers. Germany had been fighting in the skies since 1939. Poland, France, Britain, the Balkans, North Africa. Each campaign sharpened the Luftwaffe's understanding of modern aerial combat, refining tactics through survival and loss. By contrast, the United States entered the war late and cautiously. When American airmen arrived in Britain in force during 1942 and early 1943, they brought confidence, industrial strength, and new aircraft, but very little combat seasoning. Doctrine favored formation, discipline, and altitude superiority. The belief was simple: bombers would defend themselves, and fighters would escort them in clean, predictable patterns. The reality above Europe shattered those assumptions. German fighter units, flying Messerschmitt Bf-10-9s and Fokker, Wolf W-90s, were not bound by theory. They were bound by results. They attacked where formations bent. They disengaged at will. They climbed faster, rolled tighter, and punished mistakes without hesitation. By mid-1943, American bomber losses were becoming unsustainable. Missions over Schweinfurt and Regensburg left scars that could not be explained away by production numbers alone. The solution, in Washington's view, was escort fighters with range, firepower, and altitude capability. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning seemed to offer all three. Designed before the war by Clarence Kelly Johnson, the P-38 was unlike anything flying over Europe. Twin fuselage booms housed its engines, with a central nacelle for the pilot and armament. Its nose-mounted guns eliminated convergence problems. Its long wings promised high-altitude performance. On paper, it was ideal for the vast distances of the European theater. But paper did not account for how an aircraft behaved when pushed beyond comfort. Early P-38 units arriving in England in 1943 were tasked with long-range escort, interception, and reconnaissance. They flew high, fast, and straight, exactly as doctrine demanded. And that predictability made them vulnerable. German pilots quickly learned how to exploit the Lightning's size and its early operational quirks. They attacked from above and behind, forcing dives that many American pilots feared. The problem was not fear without reason. At high speeds, the P-38 could enter compressibility, a phenomenon poorly understood at the time. Control surfaces stiffened. Nose-down tendencies increased. Pilots sometimes found themselves unable to pull out of dives. Several aircraft were lost, not to enemy fire, but to physics. The Luftwaffe noticed. German intelligence reports began to identify the P-38 as dangerous at altitude, but vulnerable when forced downward. They called it the Gabelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil. But the nickname carried less fear than it later would. It was an aircraft to be managed, not avoided. Meanwhile, American training manuals lagged behind reality. Pilots were taught standardized procedures, cautious engine settings, symmetrical power management. Engines were treated as matched pairs, meant to work together in neat harmony. Few instructors encouraged experimentation, and fewer still discussed asymmetric power use except in emergencies. Yet war has a way of rewarding those who learn faster than doctrine allows. By late 1943, the air war over Europe had reached a breaking point. Bomber Command demanded deeper penetration. Fighter groups demanded better survival odds. Aircraft designers were already planning improvements, but the men already in the sky could not wait for new models. They had only what they were flying, and what they could discover on their own. It was in this environment, under pressure from loss rates and enemy adaptation, that individual pilots began to truly learn the lightning. Not from manuals, but from hours spent listening to engines at the edge of their limits, from watching German fighters commit to assumptions, from surviving mistakes long enough to correct them. And among those pilots was one from Georgia, flying alone into a sky that had no patience for ignorance, only for understanding. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning did not fail in Europe because it was poorly designed. It struggled because it was ahead of the environment it was sent into, and because its strengths demanded a different kind of thinking than most pilots had been taught. At the heart of the aircraft were two Allison V-17117 liquid-cooled engines. Each produced over 1,400 horsepower in later variants, fed by turbo superchargers mounted far back in the booms. On paper, this configuration allowed the P-38 to climb higher and maintain power where single-engine fighters began to gasp for air. In practice, it also introduced complexity. Power response was not instantaneous. Throttle movements had to be smooth. Temperature management mattered constantly. European winters exposed these weaknesses. Cold, damp air affected carburation. Turbo controls were unfamiliar. Pilots coming from single-engine aircraft often treated both throttles as one, moving them in unison, assuming symmetry was safety. The Lightning tolerated this, but it did not always reward it. German pilots, meanwhile, flew aircraft optimized for the environment. The Bf-29's Daimler-Benz engine responded quickly to throttle changes. The Fu-190, heavier but brutally strong, excelled in roll rate and dive control. Luftwaffe doctrine emphasized vertical engagement, quick strikes, and disengagement before escort fighters could react. They had learned these lessons the hard way over Britain and Russia. Against this, early P-38 units suffered. Inexperienced pilots pushed into combat at altitude, managing unfamiliar systems while tracking multiple enemies, often made conservative choices. They avoided dives. They stayed in formation longer than was safe. They reacted instead of dictating. The Lightning's most dangerous limitation, compressibility, became a psychological barrier. Pilots feared the dive because some never returned from it. Yet German fighters exploited this fear relentlessly. By forcing P-38s downward, they created hesitation. And hesitation in air combat is fatal. What was less understood was that compressibility was not uniform across all conditions. Speed, altitude, and power settings interacted in ways that manuals did not yet fully explain. Later modifications, dive recovery flaps would address the problem mechanically. But before those fixes arrived, survival depended on pilot technique. Some pilots began to notice patterns. They observed how the aircraft responded when power was reduced asymmetrically, how yaw could be induced deliberately, altering airflow across control surfaces, how the twin engines, if treated independently rather than identically, could change the Lightning's behavior in a dive or turn. This was not taught. It was discovered. The P-38 was also faster in level flight than many German fighters at altitude, but only if managed precisely. Overboosting risked engine damage. Underboosting wasted advantage. The Lightning demanded constant attention, constant adjustment, more like a machine tool than a race car. Those who learned this began to survive longer. By late 1943, a quiet divide formed within P-38 units. Some pilots flew the aircraft as instructed. Others flew it as it revealed itself to them. The latter did not speak loudly about what they were doing. Instructors were cautious. Commanders preferred standardization. But in after-action reports, patterns emerged. Certain pilots consistently escaped situations that should have been fatal. The Luftwaffe, too, noticed inconsistencies. P-38s that once behaved predictably began to act differently. Some broke dives earlier than expected. Others slipped out of attack lines in ways German pilots did not anticipate. These were not new tactics. They were new uses of existing machinery. And at the center of one such encounter was a pilot who had learned to listen to engines not as engines, but as tools that could be misused deliberately at exactly the right moment. What followed would not change the war on its own, but it would reveal something essential about air combat in the modern age. Born in a small town in Georgia, the pilot who would outsmart the Luftwaffe was shaped by a world far from the skies of Europe. He grew up amid farmland and forests, learning to repair engines by ear and intuition. Every tractor, every car, and every small machine he touched taught him patience, observation, and improvisation. These skills, seemingly mundane, became invaluable once he climbed into the cockpit of a P-38 Lightning. When he arrived in England with the 14th Fighter Group, he was one of hundreds of eager American pilots. Unlike some, he did not rely solely on instruction manuals. He had learned to read machines, to anticipate their behavior under stress. In combat, this meant noticing subtle vibrations, listening for variations in throttle response, and sensing how the aircraft's weight shifted in a dive. Humanity in this context was survival. Each decision mattered: when to accelerate, when to climb, when to turn. Split-second choices could mean life or death. His Georgia upbringing, practical, experimental, and grounded, gave him a calm edge. While others hesitated, constrained by doctrine, he instinctively understood that the aircraft could respond in ways the enemy did not expect. Technological angle. The P-38 engine. The heart of the P-38's advantage, and its danger, lay in the Allison V-17-2 engines. Twin 12-cylinder liquid-cooled power plants each driving its own turbo supercharger. The engines provided extraordinary performance at altitude when managed correctly. Yet the system was complex. Unlike single-engine fighters, the P-38 required careful throttle balancing. Each engine could be operated independently to affect yaw, roll, and dive behavior. Mismanagement risked asymmetrical torque, overheating, or catastrophic failure. Early manuals advised symmetrical power use for safety, but this limited the aircraft's potential. This is where knowledge became tactical advantage. A pilot who understood asymmetric power could manipulate the P-38 in ways that German adversaries did not anticipate. By throttling one engine slightly differently than the other, the aircraft could yaw into an attack, tighten a turn, or recover from a high-speed dive that would immobilize other pilots. In essence, the P-38 became an extension of the pilot's mind. Its twin engines were not merely propulsion, they were levers of opportunity. And only those willing to push beyond doctrine could exploit them fully. The human and technological perspectives converge in this story. One man's experience, instincts, and calm analysis meet a machine designed with potential and complexity beyond its standard usage. Together, they formed a synergy that would soon become decisive in a confrontation against one of the most disciplined air forces in history. Air combat in Europe during 1943-44 was a high-stakes game of energy management. Every fighter pilot understood that altitude translated directly into speed and maneuvering potential. The P-38, with its long wings and twin booms, excelled in level flight and diving attacks, but had limitations in tight, sustained turns. American doctrine emphasized formation flying and escort discipline, often leaving pilots reactive rather than proactive. German fighters, by contrast, exploited vertical tactics. They dove from above, attacked in fleeting bursts, and disengaged before U.S. pilots could respond. For the P-38, a poorly managed dive could induce compressibility, a condition where airflow over the wings stiffened control surfaces, making the aircraft dangerously difficult to recover. Yet tactical innovation was possible. A pilot who understood the Lightning's engine behavior could manipulate throttle settings asymmetrically, intentionally inducing slight yaw or torque to tighten a turn or recover from a steep dive. This subtle mastery transformed vulnerability into opportunity. In moments of extreme danger, it allowed a single pilot to dictate engagement terms, rather than follow the enemy's rhythm. It was in this tactical nuance that survival became strategy. What seemed like hesitation or a minor adjustment to an observer was, in reality, the controlled use of technology as an extension of the pilot's own instincts. For the Luftwaffe, the P-38 was a known quantity, but a dangerous one. German intelligence reports referred to it as the Gebelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil. Its size and speed at altitude made it formidable, but its unusual design presented exploitable weaknesses. Early encounters taught German pilots that forcing P-38s into steep dives or tight turning engagements increased the likelihood of victory. German units had perfected high-altitude combat. Messerschmitt Bf-29s climbed faster, rolled tighter, and executed vertical maneuvers with lethal precision. Their strategy relied on exploiting the predictable behavior of American fighters, which often followed rigid formation doctrine. Luftwaffe pilots expected P-38s to respond symmetrically to throttle, to avoid aggressive dives, and to behave within predictable limits. When a P-38 pilot began to act outside these norms, managing engines asymmetrically, pulling dives at unexpected points, or using torque to slip out of attacks. The Luftwaffe was caught off guard. Their tactics, honed through years of European combat, were suddenly insufficient against an aircraft controlled by a pilot who understood it as a living, responsive tool. This combination of human intuition, technical mastery, and tactical awareness created an edge invisible to the enemy until it was too late. And it set the stage for a confrontation that would expose both the strengths of the P-38 and the limitations of even the most experienced Luftwaffe pilots. For the Luftwaffe, the P-38 was a known quantity, but a dangerous one. German intelligence reports referred to it as the Gebelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil. Its size and speed at altitude made it formidable, but its unusual design presented exploitable weaknesses. Early encounters taught German pilots that forcing P-38s into steep dives or tight turning engagements increased the likelihood of victory. German units had perfected high-altitude combat. Messerschmitt Bf-29s climbed faster, rolled tighter, and executed vertical maneuvers with lethal precision. Their strategy relied on exploiting the predictable behavior of American fighters, which often followed rigid formation doctrine. Luftwaffe pilots expected P-38s to respond symmetrically to throttle, to avoid aggressive dives, and to behave within predictable limits. When a P-38 pilot began to act outside these norms, managing engines asymmetrically, pulling dives at unexpected points, or using torque to slip out of attacks, the Luftwaffe was caught off guard. Their tactics, honed through years of European combat, were suddenly insufficient against an aircraft controlled by a pilot who understood it as a living, responsive tool. This combination of human intuition, technical mastery, and tactical awareness created an edge invisible to the enemy until it was too late. And it set the stage for a confrontation that would expose both the strengths of the P-38 and the limitations of even the most experienced Luftwaffe pilots. The next moments defined the engagement. The Georgia pilot, positioned slightly above and behind the closest Fu-190, felt the familiar vibration of the Allison engines under extreme load. He eased one throttle forward, held the other steady, and the P-38 responded with a subtle yaw to port. The German pilot, expecting a predictable dive, found the Lightning sliding away with uncanny precision. In the split second that followed, he rolled the P-38 into a steep descent, maintaining speed without triggering compressibility. The dive recovery flaps remained untouched. Instead, asymmetric engine power allowed him to pull up smoothly at the last moment. The Fu-90, caught off guard, overshot. Its pilot instinctively tried to correct, but the P-38 had already exploited the energy differential. Two Bf-29s attempted to flank him, banking tightly to cut the angle. He countered with another subtle engine adjustment, inducing a controlled yaw while keeping velocity steady. The aircraft's twin booms gleamed in the sunlight, slicing the air with precision. Each maneuver seemed effortless, yet every second demanded complete focus. Within minutes, the Luftwaffe formation was fragmented. Some pilots were forced to break off to avoid collisions with their own wingmen. Others underestimated the P-38's acceleration and failed to close effectively. The Georgia pilot had achieved what few escorts could. He had dictated the terms of engagement without firing more than a few bursts. His understanding of engine dynamics had turned vulnerability into dominance. From the bomber formation below, gunners could only watch. One tracer streaked past as a German fighter miscalculated, but none of the bombers suffered damage. In the debrief, the mission commander noted the P-38's performance as extraordinary. Aircraft behaved beyond expectation, pilot skill decisive. By the end of the encounter, the P-38 remained virtually unscathed, while enemy units reported multiple losses and near misses. German pilots would later describe the Lightning as tricky, unpredictable, and dangerous, unaware that the key was not design but human ingenuity in its use. This engagement marked a turning point not only for the mission but also for the pilot's unit. It demonstrated that survival and even superiority could be achieved through a precise understanding of machinery, through creativity within strict operational parameters. The lesson was clear. Technology alone does not win battles. Knowledge, experience, and calculated action are equally decisive. As the P-38 rejoined the bomber formation and turned for base, the engines hummed with steady power. The return flight to the airbase in southern England was unusually calm, though the adrenaline lingered in the Georgia pilot's arms and shoulders. The P-38's engines purred steadily, each hum a reminder of the precise control that had just saved his life. Behind him, the bomber formation, intact and unscathed, descended toward the English countryside, guided by exhausted but grateful crews. Mission reports confirmed the outcome. No bombers lost, Luftwaffe aircraft downed or forced to disengage, and a single escort pilot credited with influencing the flow of the engagement. Commanders noted the significance. It was not merely that the mission had succeeded. It was that one pilot had demonstrated a level of aircraft mastery previously undocumented in the theater. American intelligence began gathering the post-mission debriefs. Crew testimonies described the P-38's behavior as extraordinary and almost impossible to predict. German losses were initially estimated at 3 fighters destroyed, 2 damaged, and several forced out of action by misjudged maneuvers. The Luftwaffe's own records later corroborated these figures, noting confusion among their pilots when engaging a lone P-38 during the Rouen escort mission. The pilot himself remained quiet in official reports, emphasizing teamwork rather than individual action. Yet among peers, the story of his engine management trick began to circulate. Pilots discussed asymmetric throttle use in hushed tones, aware that while it could save lives, it required a delicate balance of skill, timing, and courage. Misapplication could easily destroy the aircraft or the pilot's chance of survival. The P-38's engines had proven decisive. The Lightning's unique design, twin fuselage, turbo-supercharged engines, and concentrated nose armament offered both power and vulnerability. Pilots who understood these subtleties gained an edge over even the most experienced Luftwaffe units. The Georgia pilot's success highlighted the importance of marrying human intuition with technological advantage. More than survival, the engagement provided lessons that would ripple through the 14th Fighter Group and beyond. Tactics previously considered theoretical were now validated in combat. Engine behavior, dive control, and energy management became focal points in subsequent training sessions. Instructors emphasized careful observation, deliberate throttle adjustment, and the courage to act independently within doctrine. By the end of March 1944, the significance of the Rouen escort mission was clear. It was not a single battle that shifted the air war, but a demonstration of how knowledge and precision could turn a technologically superior aircraft into a lethal instrument, even against an enemy as seasoned as the Luftwaffe. The lessons from that mission did not remain isolated. Within weeks, reports from multiple P-38 units indicated that pilots were experimenting with subtle engine differentials during dives and turns. Commanders recognized the value of these discoveries, but they faced a dilemma. The Air Corps' doctrine prioritized standardized procedures, minimizing risk in large formations. Encouraging unconventional techniques could lead to accidents, yet ignoring proven methods would waste a critical advantage. Training manuals were revised to incorporate these observations. Instructors began teaching asymmetric engine management, emphasizing controlled yaw and precise throttle adjustments as legitimate tactics in specific scenarios. Simulator exercises, mock dogfights, and altitude drills included the nuances of the P-38's turbocharged engines, ensuring that more pilots could replicate what the Georgia pilot had achieved. This was not a secret trick, but a refinement of existing procedures, validated by battlefield experience. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, continued to regard the P-38 with caution. Intelligence reports began noting that American pilots were becoming increasingly competent in exploiting the aircraft's strengths. German commanders observed that engagements which previously favored them were becoming more uncertain. The combination of pilot skill and technological understanding blurred the clear advantage they once held over Allied fighters. The psychological impact was equally significant. Pilots who had once feared the P-38's limitations now approached combat with greater confidence. Individual ingenuity, tempered by disciplined training, was celebrated as a vital tool. Airmen understood that success depended as much on thinking creatively under pressure as on raw firepower or numerical superiority. For the Georgia pilot, recognition came quietly. He was cited in squadron reports, his actions forming the basis of new tactical training. But he remained humble. His insight had not changed the outcome of the war single-handedly, but it demonstrated a principle that would endure: mastery of machinery, combined with calm observation and decisive action, could overcome even a superior enemy in skill and experience. The mission, the maneuvers, and the engine trick became case studies. Pilots in training would read about them, simulate them, and discuss them in briefing rooms across England. Air combat in World War II was often framed as a contest of numbers, speed, and firepower. Yet moments like this reveal a subtler truth: knowledge, observation, and adaptability could outweigh brute strength. The twin Allison engines of the P-38, managed with precision, became instruments not just of propulsion, but of tactical ingenuity. What appeared to the enemy as unpredictable behavior was, in fact, deliberate control, a small, quiet advantage that ensured survival and mission success. This story also illustrates the human dimension of warfare. Training, discipline, and doctrine provide structure, but it is the pilot's judgment, honed by experience and instinct, that can turn theory into reality. A machine's potential is unlocked not through manuals alone, but through understanding, patience, and courage. The broader implications are clear. Knowledge is a weapon. Adaptation is as decisive as firepower. Lessons learned in one engagement can ripple outward, reshaping tactics, training, and the way entire units approach combat. The P-38's triumph over the Luftwaffe in this instance was not an anomaly. It was the result of deliberate thinking applied under extreme conditions. As the war continued, countless pilots would face similar moments of trial and ingenuity. Some would survive, some would not. But every time human understanding met machine capability, the outcome of battle and the course of history shifted. In that quiet, high-altitude encounter, one pilot from Georgia proved that even in the vast machinery of war, intellect, skill, and precise action could carve a path to survival and victory. It was a lesson that would endure far beyond the skies of Europe, echoing in every cockpit where human intuition meets mechanical power.